Hi, and welcome to the Art of Film Funding. I'm your co-host, Claire Papin, along with writer-producer Carol Dean, author of the best-selling book, The Art of Film Funding, and host of this show. Carol is the president of From the Heart Productions, a nonprofit organization that has supported filmmakers with the Roy W. Dean Grant, fiscal sponsorship, education, and resources for over 30 years. Carol also teaches the Learn Producing class. Each class features an industry expert guest instructor and is designed to give the information, guidance, and support to become a successful producer. You can learn more about this class and all of From the Heart Productions offerings at FromTheHeartProductions.com. Today we are joined by our guest host, filmmaker Heather Lenz, best known for directing and producing the Sundance documentary Kusama Infinity. Our special guest today is Nicholas Tabarrok. Nicholas is a prolific film and television producer whose company, Darius Films, has offices in Los Angeles and Toronto. His company has produced over 40 feature films, which have premiered at the top film festivals and sold around the world. Nicholas is also active in television and has sold his productions to companies such as ABC, BBC America, and Hulu. He's worked with many notable actors such as Ethan Hawke, Kurt Russell, Snoop Dogg, Susan Sarandon, Sandra Oh. His company has a diverse and exciting slate of projects in development for both the large and small screen. In addition to his producing work, Nicholas was hired by the Shanghai University to build and teach a course on film producing. He is a proud member of the Producers Guild of America, the Academy of Television Arts and Sciences, the British Academy of Film and Television Arts, the Academy of Canadian Cinema and Television, and the Atelier du Cinema European. Today we'll discuss his career and some of his films, including The Retirement Plan, starring Nicolas Cage, The Defender, starring Woody Harrelson, and IRENA'S VOW, starring Sophie Nélisse.
Thank you so much, Claire, for the introduction. And thank you, Nicholas, for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us today. You've had a super successful career, and I'm wondering how you got into producing. And in your experience, what's the best thing about being a producer, and what's the most challenging part?
Okay, so first of all, thank you for having me. Thanks for inviting me onto your show. And thank you for the kind introduction, although I'm not sure I would classify myself as being super successful. I have managed to eke out a living in this business, but I think super successful would apply to, Brian Grazer and Jerry Bruckheimer, and I'm certainly not at their level. But aside from that qualification, so to answer your question, okay, I wanted to be a producer before I knew anything about the business. I actually read a magazine article when I was in university about what a film producer does. And I thought that was fascinating because what appealed to me is that producing is equal parts creative and business. And that really suits my personality because I really enjoy business. I mean, it's a bit of a nerdy thing, but I actually like spreadsheets and Excel documents and working on contracts and dealing with lawyers and negotiating terms. I enjoy that work. But if I was only doing that, like if I was an entertainment lawyer or worked with business affairs for a studio, that alone would be too dry and too boring. I also need a hand in the creative because I love working with writers. I love working with actors. I love working with directors. I love working with composers. I love the creative elements of making a film. But I also know that I'm not a pure creative. I couldn't be a screenwriter. I couldn't be a director. I definitely couldn't be a composer. So I love having input in those elements, but I wouldn't be a strictly only a creative person. So producing is a foot in both worlds. So that's what really appealed to me. Um, I had no relationships or contacts in the business, so I really started at the bottom. I started as a PA, your production assistant. Then I became a production accountant. Again, not because I wanted to be an accountant, but I'm naturally good with numbers and I knew how to sort of deal with budgets and spreadsheets. So I was a production accountant, then I became a production manager, then I became a line producer, and kind of slowly moved up the ranks on the physical production side of things until I felt I had enough relationships, contacts, knowledge to make my own films. And then I started optioning scripts and trying to finance movies, and eventually I was able to do that on my own. So now I'm a full, what's the word I'm looking for? Independent producer, where I'm not servicing producing, I'm not a hired gun producer. I don't produce films for other people for a fee. I generate and create my own material. Did that, it was a long answer. Did I answer both your questions or only one of them?
Yeah, yeah. I am curious though about like what do you think the best, most exciting part of producing is, and what's the most challenging part?
Yes, right. Thank you. So the most exciting part and what I enjoy about the job the most is that no day is different. To do a job where Monday is going to be the same as Tuesday, going to be the same as Wednesday, etc. And what I do this year, May 14th, 2025 is going to be more or less the same thing I'm going to be doing May 14th, 2026. Same thing I did May 14th, 2024. A lot of jobs are like that, which is fine. But that wouldn't satisfy me. I love the fact that every single day is different. I wake up in the morning and whatever I do that day will be different from what I did yesterday and different from what I'm going to do tomorrow. So I love the variety of it. And again, coming back to what drew me to producing in the first place, I love that it exercises both sides of my brain, that it's not a purely business, or let's put it in these terms. It's not purely a right brain job or purely a left brain job. It uses both parts. So that's very, very satisfying to me that within the same day, I might negotiate a contract with a lawyer, review a budget with a production manager, and then spend a couple of hours with a writer working on a script. That's really enjoyable and satisfying for me. The hardest part, I mean, we could spend a whole hour talking about what's difficult and challenging about this business and this job because it's a lot, and unfortunately, it's only gotten harder over the years, not easier. But if I really had to distill it to a single answer, it would be packaging. The trigger to getting any film made is your talent package. It's the script to start, but then it's who's directing and who are the actors, more weighted towards who are the actors. And to get those actors is incredibly difficult because there are only a handful of actors that have value, that to drive sales, that buyers are interested in buying. And lots of people want to work with them. So it's very, very competitive and they have lots of offers, they have lots of opportunities. So it's really tough. A big part of my job is convincing agents and managers that the material I'm bringing to their clients is worthy of their consideration. That's really, again, I could list 100 things that are difficult about this job, but that is the single biggest challenge I would say I face in my job.
Well, that's yeah, it's really helpful, especially for our aspiring producers who may be listening. And how do you go about finding interesting content, that you're interested in making, and of those scripts that come across your desk, how do you decide which ones are worthy of being made?
Yeah, so we do it loosely speaking two ways. Material comes to us, we have relationships with agents and managers and so forth. So we're constantly being sent material. And so we read those. And then we've optioned a lot of books. So we will go out there, look at books. We optioned one magazine article, or sorry, we'll probably option many. I can't remember them all, but we turned one magazine article into a film, and yeah, a bunch of books as well. So we both seek out material, and it also comes inward to us. And then in determining what we choose to make or want to make, really, it's a personal taste. It's what appeals to me personally. And that honestly may not be the best business decision. If I was purely trying to build a business, um, I may be more focused on, well, where's the market going? Where are the biggest buyers? Where's the more reliable genres? And that may be the smarter thing to do. But I respond to what I personally like and enjoy, even if it may be a bit more difficult. So if the hottest thing in the market is a horror movie, if I don't really particularly like a horror movie, I'm not going to try to make that. So it's just what responds to me on a very personal taste level.
You've made numerous films, and I'd like to discuss a few of them, starting with The Retirement Plan. For anyone who hasn't seen it, can you please tell us what it's about?
Sure. So Retirement Plan is a fun action comedy, tonally and genre similar to like Beverly Hills Cop, where it's hopefully satisfying, action fans, but it's done comedically. So the premise in brief is a yeah, young woman gets into trouble because her husband gets involved with some bad guys, and they have to flee. And to protect her daughter, a young girl, she sends her to find her estranged father. So it's the young girl and the father, so they have a grandfather-granddaughter relationship. And when we first meet the grandfather, who's played by Nick Cage, and of course we aged him up to look older than he is in real life, we assume he's sort of like this harmless, helpless old man. And what we find out is he's an ex-special forces guy with a ton of skill and ability, and he has to protect his family from these mafia bosses. So that's the premise, and it was a lot of fun. Nick Cage, obviously an incredible actor. Um, Jackie Earle Haley played the mob boss, who's a phenomenal Oscar-nominated actor, and Ron Perlman was this kind of thug henchman. A great actor. So a wonderful cast, and it was a fun film to make.
Well, I'm a huge Nicolas Cage fan, so I loved seeing him in this. And one thing I really liked was, as you mentioned, he plays someone older, but it's not like he has his cane or his walker. It's
No.
really he's playing this action role, and he does a great job. And so you've already talked a little bit about the challenges of getting, big actors involved with your productions. Are there any stories you could tell about, this particular situation, getting Nicolas Cage involved with this movie?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've probably offered Nick Cage 4 or 5 things over the years, and he's, passed on all of them except this one, and that's obviously totally fine. But my point really in that anecdote is to say, he's picky and choosy as he can afford to be. Um, but I guess this one, it just something about it appealed to him. Probably playing a bit older. I think he probably had a bit of fun with that. He had a gray wig and a gray, beard, and I think he probably had fun sort of doing something a bit different there. The other thing that may have been a factor, I don't know. I never had this conversation with Nick, but we shot the film in spring of 2020 or summer of 2021, which is the height of COVID. So everything was shut down. Other films were shooting, but under really challenging, difficult circumstances to shoot during COVID. And some of the actors, not for that role or that film necessarily, because I was fortunate enough to make a few films during COVID. Some actors were like, no, I don't want to work. I don't want to, if you remember, you had to quarantine every time you moved anywhere. I don't want to quarantine. I don't want to be on set. I don't want to be surrounded by 100 people. I'm going to sit this one out. And I think Nick both from what I gleaned from him personally, but also what you hear in interviews and so forth, he doesn't want to sit around doing nothing. He wants to work. He loves making movies. So I think making a film during COVID probably was an element as well that appealed to him.
Well, yeah, it's lucky you got him. He did a great job. And you've already talked a little bit about the importance of attaching a star to a movie. And I'm wondering if you have any tips for, especially aspiring filmmakers, who aren't as experienced as you, who are trying to do the same thing, who are trying to attach a star. Do you have any tips for them?
Yeah, there's no secret formula. I mean, I wish I could say, here's the magic trick, here's a secret formula, let me let you in on the the magic bullet here. There isn't. So I'm going to answer your question two ways. If you're really a new filmmaker, like if you're really starting your career for the first time, it's probably because you're going to have a really hard time attaching a star of value. Make a film for the lowest possible budget you can that doesn't need a star to drive it. So if you can, friends, family, borrowing money, using your credit cards, whatever, make a film for 100 grand or whatever the, figure you can raise is, do that because then you don't need a star to trigger getting the film made. Make that film, get it under your belt, do your best to sell it, create relationships, create contacts. Then as you progress and you get to, your career expands and you get to making bigger films, really it's about, well, again, this isn't what I do, but what I'd say to newer filmmakers who have no relationships, hire a casting director. And the value of a casting director, it isn't what you may perceive or the general public may think is like creatively coming up with ideas. Well, here's 8 ideas I have for the role. I mean, they may add that, which is great, but really it's that you are hiring someone who can call agents and call managers and whom they know and is going to return their phone calls. So in my early days studying my career, I had casting directors and I would look at films that I liked and admired, see who the casting director was, and I would contact that person and say, can I hire you to cast my film? And again, I was paying them for their relationships. I was paying them to make phone calls for me. Now I do most of that myself because I know a lot of agents and I know an agent at several agents, but I know at least one agent at every major agency. So I can sort of get my material looked at. But if you don't have those relationships and you're starting out, hire a casting director and have them make the offers for you.
Well, that's great advice. So thanks for sharing that. Do you have any favorite behind the scenes stories about making this film?
I mean, it was a really fun experience. As I mentioned, it's a phenomenal cast, and Ron Perlman and Jackie and I should mention Ernie Hudson was also in the film, a great actor, going way back to the Ghostbusters days, and he played Nick's character's best friend in the film. I became friends with all those guys and are still in touch with them now, which is really, really nice. Um, there's sort of a unique circumstance around making this film in that we shot it in the Cayman Islands. And the reason we did that is because it was one of the very few places in the world, maybe the only place, I'm not entirely sure, but certainly the very few places in the world which was COVID free. Because the Cayman Islands is a very small community, both geographically and population wise, they were able to do what, a country the size of America, Canada, England, France, and so forth couldn't possibly do, which is they closed the borders. They literally closed the borders and no COVID ever came into the island. So when we got special permission, we dealt with the government, we did really rigorous quarantining and testing to make sure it stayed that way. But when we were shooting, it was a COVID-free environment. So while the rest of the world was shut down, we had no masks, bars, restaurants, hotels were all open. So it was a really nice respite from what was going on in the rest of the world that the 100 cast and crew, we all were free of that for about a 6-month period. And the other thing is because the island shut down, there were no tourists. It's a big tourist destination, but not during that period. So we had the run of the place. The restaurants and the hotels, they're all available just to us. So they all knew us, after that period because we were the only ones going out. So it was a really, really fun experience in that regard.
Wow, that is an amazing story, and I think speaks to your, how savvy you are as a producer to find a location like that. Could you please talk a little bit about how you approach financing a film like this and whether you always line up distribution before filming begins? Or I imagine you're past this point in your career, but I'm wondering if you ever premiere your films at festivals and sell them afterwards.
Both is the answer, both. So it's typically a combination of both of those things. Um, yes, I need to have some sort of pre-sale. There have been a few exceptions in my career where it's been pure equity financing, where an individual or a company is putting up the money for the entire budget. But that's rare. Typically, you finance through you in the indie world, you sort of assemble four, five, or six different um, um, avenues of financing, and they can be pre-sales, bank loans, and tax credits. This didn't apply in Cayman Islands, but in most places I've made films, Canada, Poland, Bogota, they bring tax credits. So that's typically one of the elements of the financing. So let's just take $10 million because it's a round figure. If you have a $10 million budget, you may get $2 million from this source, you may get another 2.5 over here, you get 4 from this place, and then a bank loan of what's called gap financing, which means the missing gap that you haven't financed yet, you'll get a loan, and that loan is paid off from the future sales of the movie. So you assemble all those, and then you go to a bank and you say, look, I've got these 6 different financiers, they're all giving me a different piece of the money. Will you give me a loan for the full amount of the budget against these different elements I have? So that's how obviously I made a 2-year process in 5 minutes. So I made it sound very simple. That takes a long time. It's complicated. But for the sake of this conversation, that sort of distills it. Um, and then ideally you have some territories open because that is what's called the upside. That is how you make more money than the budget because ultimately you want to make a film for 10 million and sell it for 12 or 15 or whatever. So what you want is some territory to be open, and then that's where you go to the festival route, and that's where you premiere at a big festival and hope that a buyer is going to come and buy the movie.
Well, again, this is all, it's so interesting to hear how you're getting these films done. So, moving on to a different movie, you produced The Defendor, starring Woody Harrelson. And for anyone who hasn't seen it, could you please tell us what it's about?
Sure. So there's no "the" in the title. It's just a
Oh,
Defendor.
my apologies.
No, that's quite all right. So Defendor, yeah, Peter Stebbings wrote and directed it and came up with the concept. I think it was utterly original and really smartly executed by Peter. The idea was it was a superhero movie in the real world in which superheroes don't exist. And the idea was that this character, played by Woody Harrelson, believes that he's a superhero. And he isn't, and superheroes aren't real, but he believes he is one. And he has these homemade little tricks and devices and so forth. And he goes out there at night trying to fight crime. And he ends up actually doing some of that and really helping out a young woman who's trapped in an awful situation with some very dangerous and bad people. And she and Woody, she's played by Kat Dennings, that character, she and Woody befriend each other and he ends up saving her and helping her.
Yeah, I have to say, I found Woody's performance in this film just super heartwarming. It
Good.
really, yeah, I thought it was great seeing him in this play this role. So
Great.
film was written and directed by Peter Stebbings, and The Retirement Plan was written and directed by Tim Brown. For aspiring directors, how important do you think it is to write your own scripts?
For early first-time directors, almost essential, almost essential, because it's really hard to finance a first-time director. And the only way in which to have any leverage is to say, look, I own the script. If you want this script, you have to bring me along as a director. So they either got to write the script or they've got to control it, meaning they've got to be the one that buys the property to the book or the article or the script or whatever it may be. You've got to firmly attach yourself because I've made a lot of films by first-time directors, and thank goodness, many of them turned out really good. But I did that not because I looked at those people and said, oh, you're the right person, you have the talent. So they didn't have a choice because, they said, you can only have this film if you take me on as a director. So that's the leverage you have. So if you're a first-time director and just going out there and say, hey, can you hire me to direct a film? I don't think it's ever going to happen. You have to be able to, unless, there's Michael Bay and oh, I'm forgetting his name now, but Fincher, David Fincher. If you're a really hot commercial director and you're like the hottest commercial director in the world, or your music videos back or music videos, perhaps then you can transfer over, but that is super rare. Like that is that's one in a million. So other than those people that have like the hottest Super Bowl commercial and somebody's going to say to them, okay, I'm going to give you a shot, you have to own the script.
Well, once again, great advice for people listening who are trying to break into the business. After a script like this comes across your desk, do you ever make suggestions for changes to the script? And if so, do you have any tips for writers when it comes to receiving notes from a producer?
Yeah, not only do I ever, always. I mean, part of what I think is a really integral part of my job is to make the script better. And that's not to say I'm better than the writer, because of course I couldn't have written that in the first place. But a second opinion, a second set of eyes, a sounding board. If I get a script and I say, okay, I'm going to make no changes whatsoever, I'm going to try to make the script, then I don't think I'm being a very good producer, and I don't think I'm doing my job to its fullest. Part of my job is to work with that writer and make it better. So every single time, to varying degrees, sometimes I'll read a script, I'll say, there's something in here I like, but it needs a lot of work. And sometimes I'll read a script and say, oh my God, this is like phenomenal already. Here's 3 or 4 small things can we talk about? So there's a wide range there of how much input I have, but I'm always giving notes. And to your question, yeah, writers, it's not to say the producers or the director, whomever else is always going to be right, but you should always be open-minded, because if you think that the words you put on the page are perfect as they are and can't be improved upon, that's delusion. I mean, that's just absolute delusion. It can always be better. I mean, take the greatest writers in the world, whomever that may be, Aaron Sorkin, or, I, I never worked with Aaron Sorkin. I don't know him, but I bet you his first draft of let's take The Social Network was not the film that we saw. David Fincher, who directed it and whom I don't remember know who produced that film, I guarantee you they put their hands on it and they worked with Aaron and they made it better, and it became a better film, better script because of working with other people. So absolutely writers should be open and available to notes because it makes them look better. It's going to make you, the writer, your work is going to be better. Take the best ideas. A producer gives you 30 ideas, 15 or 20 of them are probably good. Take them and make your work better.
Well, once again, this is great advice. And do you have any good behind the scenes stories about making Defendor that you'd like to share?
Boy, that's going back a while because that was well over a decade ago now. No singular anecdote, pops in my mind all these years later. But I will say I loved working with Peter, and we're friends and continue to try to make our next film together to this day. He's a phenomenal talent and I think a great director. And Woody's a wonderful guy. And we had poker games on the weekend and so forth. Elias Cortez was in that film as well, and we're friends to this day and a great actor. So again, it's the camaraderie, I guess, is the best part of it. I can't sort of say, oh, on day 12 this happened, because I don't remember. But just working with a great, talented, decent, good bunch of people is real pleasurable. It's not always that way. And I don't think I'll share the ones which are not that way, but Defender certainly was.
Well, that's great to hear. So you mentioned it's been a while since you made this film, but in general, could you talk about the production schedule for a feature film like this? Like, how many days are given for things like rehearsal, filming, editing, and how
Yeah.
does the time allocated factor into your analysis of whether you believe you can make a profitable film?
Yeah, so you kind of work backwards. You would think, okay, I need 8 weeks to make this film and I need to post it for 15 or whatever. Therefore, I need this much money. That's kind of logical and makes sense. It actually doesn't work that way. It's the reverse. What happens is you say, here's my script, here's my cast. How much money can I get out of the market? And you just try for the, most robust financing you can get. And then when you get that money, then you work backwards. So then, okay, I've raised $7.2 million. How many days will that allow me to shoot? How much post can I do that? So it's really a matter of what does the budget allow? I hear of films being made in 12, 15 days, which kind of terrifies me. That seems really anemic. But if they're done, I've never made a film that. I think the smallest, shortest film I've ever made is 18 days. Sorry, 20 days, maybe 18 with the holidays, but 20 days, 4 weeks. And that's pretty challenging. In the indie space, I'm firmly in the indie space, you know, s- something huge like those Avengers or Marvel movies, they shoot Mission Impossible, which is about to come out any day now. Those things shoot for 10 months. I mean, those are hundreds of days of shooting. I've never experienced anything like that. My sort of budget level and indie level that I work at 40 days, 8 weeks is like the biggest, the max, and 25, 30 is kind of the lower. So it's somewhere between 30, 35, 40 days is kind of my typical shooting schedule.
And how about editing? How long does that typically take?
You know, on the tightest, it's like 2 months and sort of 4 or 5 months at the longest. Again, at the level I work at. Editing, things can change a lot. It's surprising how much, you think you've got the script and you think, oh yeah, I'll just cut it to the script. It rarely works that way. Things change a lot in the edit. You really move things around and experiment and try things in different places. So you need time for those experiments and trial and error. So yeah, it's about 3 to 4 months I think you really want to allow yourself.
Well, yeah, it's helpful to hear. And I thought the structure of this film, by the way, was pretty interesting. But moving on to a third film, you've made so many, there's a lot to talk about. I'd like to discuss a really different film from these, and that's Irena's Vow. For anyone who hasn't seen it, can you please tell us what it's about?
Yeah, and I agree with you. It is different than a lot of films I've made because far more weighty and serious and dramatic subject matter. There's nothing light about Irena's Vow. So it's a true story. And this remarkable young woman, she was 18 years old at the time, Polish woman. When the Nazis invaded Poland in World War II, they murdered a lot of the Jews that were living there, but for the non-Jew Poles, they conscripted them to work in factories and so forth. And this young woman at 18 years of age, years later, she got back in touch with her family miraculously. But at the time, she was separated from her family. She had 4 or 5 sisters, and she was alone. And this Nazi colonel conscripted her to work as a maid in his house. So he took over this big mansion, this big villa, because he was a high-ranking Nazi in this village, and he forced her to become his maid. And she hid and kept alive 12 Jews in the basement of the house in which he lived during the entire occupation. So, literally and figuratively, under his nose, in the same house he's living in, she kept alive. She fed, gave them shelter, gave them, mattresses, blankets, these 12 Jews, and, incredible risk to her own life. She would have been killed immediately if she was discovered. And so it's a real heroic story. It's sort of a Schindler's List type story. And as I said, true woman, and so that was what the movie is about. Yeah, the Irena Gut was her name, and a real hero.
Yeah, it's a super compelling story. I'm wondering if you could talk about the pros and cons of making films based on true stories.
The pros is that there is interest in that. You see that in television, film all the time. There's a real audience interest, and I include myself in that because it's fascinating. Based on a true story, excuse me, is a marketing draw. People are drawn to those true stories. I'm going to mute for 5 seconds because I have a bit of a cough. I'm sorry. Okay, sorry about that. I have to clear my throat. Uh, so it's a marketing draw, based on a true story. The challenge, of course, is in almost every single true story, you can't absolutely adhere to the facts for many reasons. One is there isn't enough time. You're telling a story in 90 minutes, 2 hours. How do you tell the story of someone's life? Or in our case, Irena's vow is, over about a 9-month period. How do you tell that in 90 minutes without leaving some things out? So that's part of it. What do you leave out? What do you keep in? And then almost always, you've got to add something just to make the story work. So even if, okay, it literally didn't happen that way, but for dramatic effect or get the point across or to whatever the case may be, you've got to enhance things or embellish things or change things in order to make it fit a narrative structure. But you don't want to take too many liberties, otherwise you're veering too far away from the true story, and it's not fair to the people you're telling the story about. So it's striking that fine balance between what's accurate and real and what poetic license you can take in order to tell a story.
Well, once again, this is excellent wisdom you're sharing. And yeah, I think, you did a great job with this story, and I was fascinated by it. This film was shot in Poland, and I was also wondering if you could tell us about that experience.
Yeah, it because it was all set in Poland, we really had to shoot there. Some films what's called cheating and you don't shoot in the real location. Toronto, because Canada is cheaper and has tax credits, has been shot for Chicago and New York and other big cities a million times. So that's very common. But in this case, it was so Poland set that really to do and because it's a true story, to do the film justice, we really thought we had to shoot there. And Irena, of course, was a Polish citizen. I had a phenomenal production partner, Beata Pasula. She really took care of all of the physical production, the kind of things that I would do typically, hiring the crew and looking after the budget and monitoring the schedule and renting all the gear. For this one, a bit of a treat for me is Beata took care of all of that because it's a foreign country. I mean, I can't speak the language. I don't know the crew. I don't know how the system works. So I couldn't have done it without her, without a partner. And she was an amazing partner to have. So it was a really, really, and I love traveling. I love being in different cities. I love shooting all around the world. So it was all great. It was all positive experience. And the crews were great. We brought a DP and then we edited and did the post-production in Canada. But all the other crew, yeah, except for the also I should credit to the story editor, sorry, script editor, script story supervisor. I'm sorry, because it's an English script. We need to bring someone from Canada. But the crew there was phenomenal, and it looked great. I think the wardrobe and the set dressing and the vehicles, all World War II appropriate, period appropriate. just great. So I think Poland really delivered.
Yeah, I thought the locations where you shot were great.
Great.
What was the biggest obstacle you had to overcome to make this movie?
That one was closing the financing. And I'm going to make a distinction between raising the financing and closing the financing. And I won't go too far into this because it's a bit esoteric. And again, it would be an hour unto itself. But raising the financing is going out and having all these sources say, yes, we're interested, we're going to give you this much money. That um, certainly was difficult and challenging. It took time. But the harder part was closing the financing. And that is where you take all these different financiers and somehow add them together to make your entire budget and get one bank loan to finance the entire movie. So we had more than any other film I've ever made, that had the most financiers. I think we had four different, maybe five different financiers out of Poland. We had four different Canadian government financiers. We had a couple of private individual financiers. We had pre-sales and we had a bank loan. So it was, I don't know what it just added up to, but maybe 10 different financiers, different languages, different rules, different countries. So it was really, really difficult to take all of these contracts because they don't give you money, they give you a contract. And you take these contracts and you go to the bank and you say, look, I've got a contract. Will you loan me the money? And then when a movie is finished and complete, I'll give you back the money. That was really, really tough. It was a very, very difficult financing to close.
Yeah, these things are never easy making indie films, that's for sure.
No, no.
Irena's Vow premiered at the Toronto International Film Festival, which is a great festival. Can you please talk about the audience reaction?
I, I, I was there obviously, and I like to think, I'm biased, I'm close to the movie. I like to think they loved it. It felt like they really erupted in sincere applause and some tears and some very moving story. And we had Irena's real daughter there at the time who came up on stage afterwards. And there's this amazing true moment that happens in the movie. And I don't want to, discourage anyone from seeing it, but I'll give it away here because to answer your question fully, that there was a young baby who was born during the time at which these, 12 Jews were in captivity, essentially, hiding. And so that baby considers Irina his second mother because if it weren't for her, he never would have been born, never would have been out in the world. And that man, who's an old man now, he also came. So we had the baby. So the audience watch this movie, and they see and hear about a young baby being born, and then coming on stage after the movie's over, whatever the math is, 70 years later, is the real baby who was born in the villa. So that was a really, really moving moment, I think, for everyone.
Well, that's an incredible story, and I have to say that's the reason people love going to film festivals and having these
Yes,
like live Q&As after movies because
correct.
you have these experiences you just don't get at home, you know?
That's right.
Yeah. So you've produced many movies and also series. Is there anything you still hope to accomplish that somehow eluded you?
Oh my God, yes, absolutely. I mean, so much. I mean, uh, where can I start? Not to be, aggrandizing or not to be overly ambitious, but boy, I mean, every film producer wants to get an Oscar nomination or win an Oscar. That would be an absolute career highlight, goes without saying. Winning Sundance, winning TIFF, winning Cannes, any of these major film festivals around the world. It's great to be accepted and to play in them. Yes, that's wonderful unto itself. But they have awards and they have prizes and they have audience favorite awards. It'd be amazing to win one of those. There are so many great actors and directors whom I would love to work with, who I aspire to work with. So my gosh, there's a list of 1,000 things I could tell you that I still hope to achieve one day in my career.
Well, you're on a roll, so I'm sure that,
I hope.
yeah, I'm sure our audience can look forward to, finding out, what you're up to next, what's on the horizon. I'm sure have a lot of great work to come. Do you have any advice for aspiring filmmakers or perhaps aspiring producers since that's your focus?
Yeah, it is because I didn't know anything about the film business when I started, and I didn't know anyone in the film business. I kind of did it the wrong way, which was, as I said, starting out on set, being a PA and learning how sets work. If you want to be a producer, that isn't the place you want to be. To be a producer, work in an office because films are made not on set, films are made in an office. The hard work, 90% of the job, 95% of the job is done in an office in front of a computer, not on set behind a camera. So you want to work at an agency or for a studio, for a production company, or for a producer, and you want to meet people, listen in on phone calls. I don't mean illegally. I mean just be around it to sort of pick up on, say if you work for a producer, how does that person, how is that your boss? What are they saying to pitch material? Who are they speaking to? How do they put things together? What does that bank deal look like? So if you want to be an aspiring producer, don't spend time working on sets. Get into an office of some sort. An agency is a great way to start because the relationship building is phenomenal. Work for a producer, work in a studio, work for a production company, and be around people and meet people.
Well, that's great advice. And I'm wondering, sometimes our guests are working on things they can talk about and sometimes not, but I'm wondering if you're working on anything currently that you would like to share with our audience.
I'm working on a lot, as you have to, in this business. Maybe 5 to 10% of what you develop and try to make ever gets made. And that's not just me, that's not my failure rate. That's for everyone, even at the highest levels. So I'm working on, I don't know if I have to think them all through, maybe a dozen different features at the moment. And again, I hope one or two or three of them get made. Well, I hope all of them get made, but I know all of them won't get made. So, yeah, I probably all a bit early to talk about because I don't like sort of talking about things and then they never happen. It sort of sounds worse. But both television, I'm pitching some TV. Later this month, I got some pitches coming up on a TV series I'm putting together. I have a TV material in front of some buyers at the moment. I'm waiting to hear back from the broadcasters on that. Got some casting, a couple of features, so lots of things I would say, but too early to sort of talk about specifics. Yeah.
Well, understood. If you don't mind, I'd like to circle back to something you said earlier in the show. You were talking about optioning material, which of course people often option books and so forth, but you talked about optioning a magazine article, or maybe it was a newspaper article that you turned into a film. And I was wondering if you could just tell us a little bit about that. Like, what was it that caught your interest in this article, and how did you go about fleshing it out into a film?
Yeah. So um, there was a magazine article written in the New Yorker in 1973. And I was not producing movies in 1973, so it came to me much, much later. But it was about Stockholm Syndrome. And I think most people are familiar with what Stockholm Syndrome means, that bizarre psychological effect where a captured person ends up having loyalty or allegiance to their kidnapper, which is a real thing. And it's kind of strange. How does that happen? What a lot of people don't know, and I didn't know until this was brought to my attention, was that the reason where that originally came from and why it's called Stockholm Syndrome is because this guy, bank robber, robbed a bank in Stockholm, Sweden in 1970, 71, something like that. And he held 4 or 5 people captive. And over the course of the siege, the police surrounded the place and there's a 3 or 4 day siege. Over the course of that period, these hostages aligned themselves with the kidnapper and they sort of were on his side and loyal to him. And in fact, at the end, when they were being released finally, when he gave up, they were afraid that the police might shoot him. So they surrounded him as they were exiting the bank in order to protect him. So it's a really fascinating story. So this magazine article, I didn't discover it. Another producer, Scott Aversano, he discovered it and brought it to me to see if I could help, put it together. And we did, and that became the film Stockholm. So we optioned the writer had died at that point, because this is like 2016, 2017, and the article was written in 73. So the writer had died, but he had three daughters who the estate was still active. So we optioned the script from his three living daughters, and hired a writer director, Robert Bedreau, to adapt the article into a screenplay. And then we cast Ethan Hawke to play the bank robber, and the amazing Swedish actor Noomi Rapace to play the main teller.
Wow, that's a great story. And you're correct. I never knew the origin. I always
Right.
associate Stockholm Syndrome with Patty Hearst,
Yes, right, exactly. She's probably, especially to Americans, probably the more famous example, but that came afterwards.
Yeah. Well, for anyone who would like to follow your career, could you please share with us your website, your social media handles, anything else that you would like to share for people who'd like to, follow what you're up to?
Yes, absolutely. The website is pretty simple. It's just dariusfilms.com, Darius. We also have a YouTube channel. We had some tech issues with getting Darius Films, so I think gosh, I should know this. I'm sorry. Darius Films Productions, Darius Films Inc. It's something like that. We had to add a word onto it. So it's either Darius Films Productions or Darius Films Inc. We have a YouTube channel. We do have social media. I'm not a pro at social media. I'm a bit a bit too old to be a social media pro. So I actually don't even know what our handles are, but I think our Instagram and Twitter is just at Darius Films.
Great. And is there anything else you wanted to, share with our audience that I didn't ask you about already?
I think, Heather, that was a great interview. You're very thorough. You asked a lot of really smart, incisive questions. I don't think I actually have any, I don't think we left anything on the table. I think we covered it.
Well, thank you so much. Well, in fact, I actually do have several burning questions I would love to ask, but maybe someday we can have you back because obviously you're, just making a lot of things happen in the film industry. But thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule to join us and share all of your wisdom and your great stories. So we really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me on your show. I appreciate your interest.
All right. And thanks everyone for listening.
Now, in its second edition, Carol Dean's popular book, The Art of Film Funding, has 12 new chapters to cover all areas of film financing and how to avoid expensive pitfalls. Learn how to start with an idea and end with a trailer, how to make an ask for money, create your story structure and your trailer, legal advice, fair use, successful crowdfunding, how to ask for music rights, and what insurance you can't shoot without. Available on Amazon under Carol Dean and at FromTheHeartProductions.com. I want to remind our listeners that David Raiklin is a brilliant and talented award-winning musician who scores films and can compose music for a trio or for a full orchestra. David is a very good friend to the independent filmmaker and comes highly recommended by From the Heart Productions. If you need music to help tell your story, please contact him at davidraiklin.com. That's David, RAIKLEN.com. And Carol and I want to thank you for tuning in to The Art of Film Funding. Please visit our website at FromTheHeartProductions.com. You can also find us on Facebook and Twitter. Good luck with your films, everyone.